Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Talksport. Chancellor George Osborne got up and made his autumn statement a few hours ago. He announced an awful lot of doom and gloom. He was ordered to kind of try and get the economy back into some kind of shape. He's trying to protect Britain from the Eurozone crisis. You've often been outspoken about what it is that Western governments should do about all of this. People, I think, will be very, very confused about the talk of growth, no growth, jobs cuts and tax rises or no tax rises. It's all just that we are screwed. Isn't that the line that we should all have to follow?
People need to get real. You're absolutely correct. We're in economic depression. In 1931, people didn't realise we were in depression then. I tell you, they knew it a few years later. And the reason why people are very confused as to what's going on is because, politicians from all sides, Liberal Democrats, Conservatives, Labour, they all basically tell us the same things. They pretend that there's a Grand Canyon of policies between them, but the reality is that they tell us the same things. And before this statement, or a year ago, what was expected was that under Alistair Darling, under Labour's plans, they were going to increase the debt by 59% over a parliament. Under Osborne's plans, we're going to increase the debt by 51%. In other words, a wafer-thin crack difference between left and right. And then when you add on that the media all took the position that we have to keep bailing out the banks, we have to slash interest rates. In other words, everyone, practically everyone who had anything to say on these matters took one line. And then there were people like me who are probably 1% of commentators, in other words, a tiny minority. We said, no, it's rubbish. You cannot get economic growth in an economy of our size with £7,000 billion of debts or unfunded liabilities. You can't get it. And those politicians, such as in the government who say we want growth, and such as those in the opposition who say you need growth, all of them are being totally disingenuous by saying you can get growth. You can't. Not when you're weighed down by £7 trillion of debts. People need to get real.
Well, this is what I think people would have watched and been amazed by in the last day in Westminster, if you like, where Ed Balls and George Osborne are making these ridiculous counterclaims and claims about percentages and about billions of pounds and figures and stimulus and this, that and the other. And people just go, well, hang on a second, what does any of this mean? I mean, is actually putting more 2-year-olds into nurseries going to make any difference? Probably not. Is giving a bunch of money to build some roads going to make any difference? Probably not. Is taking the 3p off the fuel tax in January going to make any difference? Probably not. It's all smoke and mirrors, isn't it?
The politicians, there are very few leaders who are politicians. I would say Churchill was a leader. I would say Thatcher was a leader. Please note, I'm not political here. In other words, they have been conviction politicians. They've more or less said it as they saw it, rather than to curry favour to get re-elected. They did things that the populace actually in the short term would not want to happen. And look at what happened. We won the Second World War, or at least we kept going until the Americans came in. And indeed, in the 1980s, we became the most attractive country in Europe into which to invest because of Thatcher's policies. However, most politicians are not leaders. They are political opportunists. They are spivs. As I say, whichever side of the spectrum, they're all the same. And their job is to get elected or re-elected. Their job is to give people hope, even though there is no basis for the hope. I have been saying publicly for the past 4 or 5 years several years even, that we have got ourselves into such a massive debt situation that we need to take a radical change mini baby steps are not going to help. And I said it last year when the new government came in, and this is the main mistake that the Conservative and the Lib Dems made. They said, we can take baby steps and we can sort out the problem. They talked rubbish then, and they're still talking rubbish even today with the massive cuts and the austerity that Osborne's talking about. Do you know what? It's still not going to help. Why? Because certainly in the short term, it's going to have a detrimental effect on economic growth. But then again, if any of the countries in Europe go bust, which we believe will happen over the next year or two, then any chances of growth in the UK are out of the window anyway. And also in the long term, they don't sort anything, because we are still going to be weighed down by the fact that this country has the largest amount of debt in the world when you add together government debts, liabilities, corporate debts, and household debts. The politicians are playing games with us. They don't take a long-termist approach. The Germans do, and that's why Germany is the strongest economy on the planet. And that's why Britain is just about the weakest economy on the planet. The fact that the southeast of England hasn't seen much of a collapse, whereas other parts of the country have. I give you an example. Northern Ireland, house prices are down 50%. That's what's happening in that part of the country, and there are other parts of the country as well. The fact that the southeast of England hasn't seen much of it yet, compared to, say, Northern Ireland or Greece or Italy, is simply because much of our economy is global finance. Global banking was bailed out by the so-called political leaders a couple of years ago, saved the world. They did nothing of the sort. They compounded the problem. And, of course, by bailing out the banks, it effectively bailed out the southeast of England. Well, I'll tell you, ours is coming because we've borrowed vast amounts of money, and we're soon going to have to either repay it or borrow some more. And by borrowing more, as indeed was announced today, an extra £111 billion over the next few years, well, I'll tell you, our interest rates for borrowing are going to go through the roof, and that will then indirectly reflect in mortgage costs and business loans costs.
Okay.
In other words, we're toast.
Much of what George Osborne talked about in the last autumn statement was about protecting Britain from the Eurozone crisis and making sure that Britain's kind of credit-worthiness, if you like, was not affected. And people are becoming obsessed with the price of government bonds, and they look at these charts that keep being put up on Sky that, you know, Italy's up above 7 and then Spain is 6. Excuse me. Spain is 6 and France is 5 and we're still down somewhere below 3. That doesn't really mean anything, does it? It just means that people will still lend us money.
Yes, exactly. And it's very technical as to the reason why the rate of interest that our government can borrow is one of the lowest in the world. In essence, the markets are pricing in that we are in economic depression. That's actually the reality. And it's certainly true that you go across the channel and the interest rates that some of these southern European countries are paying to borrow, and it's countries, not individuals, is a fantastic rate of interest, huge interest rates. Greece, for example, if they want to borrow over 10 years, they have to now pay 28%. Now, think about that. That's a Western first world country pays an interest rate significantly more than you or I could borrow at. So it's not a question of us being in the euro or not in the euro. The United Kingdom has too high a proportion of our economy in global finance. The City of London is a major engine of the economy in the United Kingdom, and global finance is now in decline. This year alone, globally, 200,000 jobs have been lost in the financial sector. Compared to 2009, which was after the biggest economic collapse in history of 2008, when 175,000 jobs were lost. In other words, global finance is in decline. Therefore, as those countries go bankrupt, Greece, Ireland, yes, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Belgium, you name it, that means that the lenders to those countries are going to have to take massive losses, and that includes the British banks. In other words, it doesn't matter whether we're in the euro or not. The banking in the City of London is toast, which means that the southeast of England is toast, which in effect means that the whole of the UK is toast. We need to get away from depending on global banking to sort out our economy. Well, you know, sometimes when you guys in the media talk to these city guys, what they try to pretend is what's good for the city is good for the economy. Well, believe me, in the short term it might be, but in the medium to long term it never has been and it never will do. We need to get away from global banking.
And is there anything that George Osborne should be doing that he's not doing, or is he just helpless? I mean, what should he be doing?
Yes, absolutely. They should be taking a radical set of policies and doing entirely different things. George Osborne, Gordon Brown, Ed Balls, Alistair Duck, they're all the same. That is the point I'm making. There is basically no difference. There's a wafer-thin difference between them. What they should be doing is exactly the opposite of what they are doing. Here's one. They should stop bailing out the banks. They're talking about £30 billion of investment in infrastructure and whatever. All good, by all means. But we're giving hundreds of billions of pounds to the banks. We're doing exactly the same that Japan has been doing since 1989 when they started their crash. They've had 22 years and counting of depression. We are now 4 years and counting in depression, and by bailing out the banks every other year, by quantitative easing, printing money, we're just keeping ourselves in depression. So they should stop bailing out the banks. Secondly, they should hike interest rates now. I know that would be difficult. Beyond difficult, no doubt, for borrowers. But the fact is, A, they shouldn't have borrowed those vast sums in the first place at the stupid high house prices. They're going to be toast anyway. Many people are going to lose their homes anyway because they're going to lose their jobs. So, let's take the hit now. Increase the value of our currency. By doing so, we would reduce the costs of our imports like fuel, heat and light and food. We could reduce the costs of living for every man, woman and child in the country. For every small business, medium-sized business in the country, we could reduce the costs. That's the way to get the economy going. Instead, they're doing everything they possibly can, ultimately, to keep the status quo. So they're taking from savers, they're taking from the prudent, they're increasing unemployment, they're reducing public services, and they're handing vast amounts of money to bankers. This is not me being anti-capitalist. I am a capitalist. Handing vast amounts of money to failed businesses is not capitalism.
No, indeed. So, are they not sort of hamstrung, though, by what everybody else in the world is doing? You know, they can only do what everybody else in the world is doing. They can't kind of get themselves out of it unilaterally, if you like.
No,
they can't suddenly exit.
No, that's not true. There have been examples in the last 20 years of individual countries doing broadly what I've just said. For example, Russia, Argentina, Chile, Iceland did it 4 years ago. They said to the bankers, hey, do you know what? We've borrowed so much, we just can't pay you. We're going to default on our loans, and you're just going to have to sing for it because we're not going to give you the money back. We can't pay the money. We haven't got it. And everyone and his dog, apart from people like me, said, well, Iceland's going to be a pariah now. Iceland's toast. Iceland's going to be in depression for the next 1,000 years. Do you know what? Iceland, 3 years later, is one of the fastest growing economies on the planet.
Jonathan, it's fascinating stuff. We'll have to talk to you again in another couple of weeks' time, because it seems as though the recipe for disaster continues, and despite all of your warnings, despite what you've said before, they're not doing it the right way. So we'll come back to you very, very soon and find out where we are in about 2 weeks' time.
You'd be welcome.
Thanks very much indeed for your time, Jonathan.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye.